Hey friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Welcome back, listeners. Forward Rewind podcast. Blair here. I'm here with Pastor Kirk and Pastor Daryl. We've been the dream team for a few weeks now. Actually, no. You guys have been on for a while. I was away for a while, but now I was back last week. Let's make it like a streak. Okay. We should just cancel Derek out of it, and we'll just be like Kirk, Daryl, and Blair. That'll be awesome.
Cancel culture on Derek.
Oh. I'm so fired. No. We love Derek, and he's coming back soon. He is back. Oh, he is back. Okay.
He's not in the office yet, but he is back.
I
was texting him last night. So
good.
He is back.
I hope he feels rested and is ready for some questions in the next few podcasts. I'll give him a lot of them just to wake him up. I have a great opener this morning, and sometimes we start off differently, but this one's going to be a fun one. I can feel it. Daryl, in your message, we were talking about justice, and just to catch up any listeners, we are in a series called Filtered, talking about Philippians 4:8, and we've hit the point of thinking about things that are just. And Daryl, you told us a story about being in your car and randomly an old embarrassing moment came into your head and you were like, oh, I don't like how I feel while I think of this, which you connected to pain later. But I was like, immediately when you started talking, I was like, oh, it's a perfect opener. Name your most embarrassing moment and let's laugh about it. Come on, who's first?
Man.
Who's first? And I will clarify, everyone has to answer. Billy, you can not answer this one time. Well, I'll find out some dirt later and then I'll share it. But
it's a toss-up between the time. So it's both of them are preaching stories.
Yes.
And it's a toss-up between the time that I had my fly open.
Oh. That's subtle though. Like sometimes you notice, sometimes you don't.
Yeah, it depends if the shirt's sticking out or not.
Oh, that's not good.
And in a similar fashion, it's also the time where I realized partway through my sermon that I had to go to the washroom.
Oh, did you excuse yourself?
No, I stood really close to the pulpit so nobody could see if there was any accident that happened.
Oh, smart. So you were hugging that pulpit.
Pretty much, yeah.
Man.
And then you never missed an opportunity to use the washroom before a sermon
That is
again.
very true.
Yeah.
That is very true.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Those are pretty good. What about you, Daryl? You told us your junior high one, but you weren't very specific, but maybe there's a better one.
Let me think here. So you know what? This is one of those things. I put my foot in my mouth so often. I have too many examples.
Oh yeah,
hard
I feel
to
you.
choose from. Actually, I'm just gonna riff on what Kirk just said there a second ago. So I didn't have exactly that problem, but one of the first times, if not the first time, I preached, I all of a sudden had to use the washroom, and it was just before I went up. So I had everyone greet one another, and then I snuck off.
Smart.
Gave myself a good 60-second barrier.
That's very strategic.
There was a side door to the staff washrooms. Went over there and was back. Yeah.
Did the sound guy leave the mic on while you were?
Here's a little hint for anyone who ever gets into a ministry or an opportunity where you have to wear a mic. Don't just turn it off, but disconnect it.
Absolutely.
I have always done that practice, so I knew I was safe. Never connect it if you're going to leave. If you leave the auditorium.
Very true.
Yes.
There's YouTube videos about that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You never if you never trust the sound guy, Dave, don't trust. No, just kidding.
I mean, you guys are in a tough I was going to say tough industry, but I mean like a tough career. Like you're up in front of people. So I should have guessed that your embarrassing moments were in front of, at the pulpit. So.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not terribly embarrassing.
No,
though.
that's not embarrassing. No. So my whenever someone asks me this, I always say the same one because it killed me.
Okay.
And I don't know. So like, when I was in grade 2,
Wow.
This is triggering.
This is stuck with me. So I would wear like a shirt and then I would wear like a sweater over top of the shirt.
How cute.
And I would go to class, right?
Oh.
As, young Daryl.
Little
In
Daryl.
class. And, it inevitably gets a little warm. So I gotta like take the sweater off and keep the shirt on. And both came off.
Oopsies.
And the person sitting behind me doesn't miss a beat. And they just look up and they're like, Daryl, why is your shirt off? And I died. Like that's, I think, the first real embarrassing moment I remember.
you.
I'm like, I'm such a failure.
People saw your belly button. No.
So I just booked it out of there.
Did you cry?
The teacher came after me like, Daryl, what's wrong? You know what's wrong. I'm like, just give me a second here. Don't follow me. Come on. You need to have a little bit more self-awareness.
Did you have this? Did you have this talk with her in grade 2? Was it 2? You were in grade
I was in grade 2. I think I got in trouble. I'm sure I've always been a little quick-witted and a little too harsh around people.
My guard is up now.
Yeah, I was like, back off.
Yeah.
Anyways,
all right.
All my embarrassing moments are just in that vein of just I did something really dumb.
Yeah.
And there you go.
Mine, Derek. I think Kirk's already heard it because unfortunately Derek was there, so he loves telling it. But mine was we were handing it. Forward Kitchener was brand new. I think we were just a few months open, and I was handing out water bottles with Derek's wife Amanda, and we went to Victoria Park to hand out because they said Forward Church on them, right? And kids, parents, all this, and they were playing rugby. And so there was a tent set up with some rugby players cooling down. And I was like, let's go give them to the rugby players. Amanda's like, great idea. So we walk over and I'm like, hey, you guys are hot. Do you want a water bottle? And Amanda like stopped and looked at me and I was like, I mean, your temperature's, I'm married, and here's your water bottles, come to Forward Church. They were like, oh, yeah, we are hot. I was like, oh. And Amanda, of course, was like dying and had to quickly run tell Derek. And
the new church marketing strategy.
Yeah, that was a great moment. I'll save my others for another day because I too have many. But I thought that was a good opener. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh, there's our opener. Love it.
Nice.
Getting back to our series, Philippians 4:8, filtered. We've made it to thinking about whatever is just. And I'd love for one of you, maybe we'll throw it at Kirk. Start us off by giving a brief overview of your message and the main takeaways. Notice how I said overview and not synopsis.
Yeah.
Because I can't say that word apparently. Overview. I kept tripping over it. So give us a brief overview of your message and the main takeaways, Kirk.
Yes, Blair.
Okay.
Yes, we're in this filtered series and thinking about what is just. The word just means this idea of thinking about what is right, the way things should be as defined by God. It has to be through the truth filter as well and not what we in our own minds think is right. And I really connected it to this idea of peace, peace in our own lives, and peace in the lives of the people around us as we think about what is just. That is what God will bring his peace into our hearts, but he'll also lead us to be a people who work for others to find what's right so they can have peace in their life.
Daryl, do you want to do your brief overview as well? And we'll take it from there.
I can do that.
Right.
Yeah. Start off by explaining how one of the hardest things to forget is injustice. As your story or your question at the very beginning illustrates well, we can go right back to those moments, right, where not just embarrassing moments. I mean, that's the fun thing to talk about, but it's the painful things that really stick with us, these vivid memories. And so when we're talking about our thoughts, that's, I think, an important place to begin. How does injustice affect our thoughts? And what does Scripture call us to be thinking about justice? And so really quickly, I just walked through 3 things that justice means. It means freedom for us. It also means calling us into action. And ultimately, it calls us to reconciliation as well.
I love that. Did either of you have anything that jumped out at you most in your prep this week?
For me, the thing that jumped out most is how incomplete a view of justice we typically have, and how fully orbed or it's just so much more comprehensive. The concept of justice is far more comprehensive than we tend to think of it as, both on the spiritual side and in the physical realities of our life. So it's definitely one of those topics you could have preached on for a very long time because there's so much to unpack.
Yeah, you could feel that. I know my brain was taking off during each message too, for sure. I could feel that. Did anything jump out at you, Daryl?
Yeah, a few things that really jumped out at me. I think one of the things I found most interesting, and it's a book I referenced in the message on Sunday, a book called Unoffendable. A really good book. I actually first listened to it on audiobook, and so the author read it, and I really enjoyed his humor that very clearly comes out in the page. He's a radio personality, so I think he felt very at home reading. Some audiobooks are very dry. This was a good one. This was good. I actually liked it so much I went out and bought the physical copy. So he has a chapter on injustice, and he talked about this idea of we often think that we need to combine anger and justice together, that we have to be really angry as we pursue justice. And his whole point of his book, he actually creates a biblical argument against anger, that we are not called to be angry, or as his title of his book explains, we're not called to be offended. A timely message for today's culture with social media and everything. I think it's really easy to be offended, and what we're called to be is unoffendable. But so how do we actually pursue justice without this idea of anger? And I found that such an interesting thing to begin thinking about, and realizing that is a true and better picture of what biblical justice looks like.
So then we did this with when we talked about truth and we talked about honor. Our culture has a different view of what justice is. Before we dive into these questions, so we can be clear, can we compare culture's view to the biblical view of justice?
So for me, in my study, here's the big thing. I think that, actually there's 2 things. One, culture's view of justice is purely a physical issue, not necessarily a spiritual issue. So culture goes looking for any form of making things right for someone on a physical level, whether that's money, like I should receive compensation for the damages you've committed against me, or whatever it is. But we go on a purely physical level. God's is far more comprehensive. It's physical and it's a spiritual issue. I think that the other piece is that the world will call a lot of things justice that do not fit under God's category of justice. And so there are things that the Bible would call sinful, and some people would look at it and go, no, this is a justice issue, and people should treat me or give me my rights in a certain way. And God would look at it and say, no, that's a sin issue, not a justice issue. And so the waters get muddied a lot because humans create their own definition of justice is anything where my feelings have been hurt, and now therefore somebody owes me justice. Whereas God, there's a very clear line around these are the things that God cares about and says that these are where there are injustices, and these are the spaces where it's purely just your own sinfulness. It's not that you've had an injustice committed against you. It's that your own sinfulness has brought you to this point, and you need to deal with sin in your life first.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about putting justice, or putting that it's wise to put what we think is just through the truth filter too.
Yeah.
So, and you kind of talked about, but what danger do we face if we don't do this? Is it offense, like you were mentioning, Daryl? Like, what is the dangers of if we're not? You said God said, that's the truth. So if we're not doing that, what dangers are we facing?
Yeah, the dangers that we face is we start to treat everything like a justice issue. So, if let's say I was caught committing adultery and now my life ends up in a divorce and the judge says, Kirk, you have to pay this much in child support.
Okay.
And I go, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. It's not fair that I have to pay that much in child support. Why are you treating me that way? Now I feel like there's an injustice that's been committed against me.
Okay.
Because of how much the judge is asking me to pay in child support. Well, the reality is it's not an injustice that's been committed against you. It's my own sinfulness that got me into the hole in the first place.
Right.
Right. And so what we end up doing is we end up thinking and justifying every action that we take and not looking at it through the filter of, was I right or wrong to begin with in this? Is this truly a justice issue on the physical level? Or is this a justice issue on the spiritual level where I've sinned against a holy God and I need his forgiveness? I need what God has done for me through Jesus to justify me and restore my relationship with God. So the danger is just you become self-delusional and you become a space where you end up justifying every action in your own life.
And I think that this is something where, and Kirk, feel free to jump in on this too, but or tell me if I'm off base, but it's this idea of sometimes we preach to the culture and sometimes we preach against the culture.
Yeah.
Sometimes the culture and the world around us just has it completely backwards. And I think on justice, this is in many cases a time when we actually are speaking to the culture. As Kirk just explained, there are times when the culture is pursuing justice. It is trying. There is something inside of us as created in God's image. Even if we're sinful, we still have this desire for justice in the world. And yet without the truth of Scripture, we're going to fall short of God's standards. We're going to get justice wrong. And this is why we need to preach to. And when I say preach to, I don't just mean like Sunday. I mean, like as Christians, we speak into family and friends around us. We speak into the culture saying, yes, pursue justice. And this is how God designed it. And I find that is the most helpful thing. And with that, you're going to see that, there are times where we do need to punish sinfulness. That's not a justice issue in the way that the world tends to think of it. There are times when really wrong things really do need to be punished. Don Carson, in a message years ago, he explained it this way. He said, this is why we like action films, and it's why artsy films win awards. He said action films, the good guy, you have a really, really good guy, and you have a really, really bad guy who has done terrible things. And now the good guy is just, he is right in shooting at him. And he's like, and that's why we like these films. It speaks like, you got to punish, like that's wrong. Now, if the person didn't do a terrible thing and the good guy's shooting, he would no longer be the good guy in the film. And this is where the artsy films tend to win all the awards, because they like to play and toy with this idea of, is this really justice? And what about their tragic backstory? And people like that because it makes you think, but deep down, like, no, like there's something that's not right about this film. And it's why a lot of people get mad at the Oscars because of what wins. Anyways, we won't get into that. But I think that's where film and these stories are actually revealing something about how God has designed the world to function.
Yeah, and you both use the word entitled. Is that what you're kind of meaning when you're talking about that, like, or victim? The word victim came into my head when you were describing it, that we kind of make ourselves the victim a lot.
Yeah, we live in a space where we think I should get what I deserve. Yeah. And the problem is we have created our own definition of what we think we deserve.
Right.
And so whenever you live in that space of being that entitled, if you want to carry that out, I should get what I deserve, then you deserve God's judgment. Like you should die. You should go to hell. And that is the mystery and power of justice from God's perspective, is that he does require judgment on our sin, but he's still merciful. Like he's fully just and he's fully merciful. And that is part of what brings it to life, because you can't, when you realize God's mercy in your own life, it changes you. It's hard for you to hold things against other people and say, you should do this to me, or you should give me what I deserve, when you realize that if you would get everything you deserve, this is what the end result would be.
So let's talk more about God's mercy and his grace, because you both talked about that too. And we could take the conversation in two directions here, but I'm going to go this way and we can circle back. Let's discuss why God being just is a gift of grace and not just the punishment of what one deserves. You talked about the two sides. The words justice and gift don't feel like they fit in the same sentence to most people.
No, they don't. No,
Feels
they don't.
funny.
They do. They do feel funny until you're on the receiving end.
Right. Yeah.
Then they don't feel as funny. And when you're on the receiving end and you understand that God in his justice also showed mercy by having Jesus die instead of you or me, that's a gift. And we all would look at that and go, yeah, okay, I get that as a gift. But the other side of justice, and the true meaning of the word justice, is a restoring to what is right. And so justice is not only a punishment for what is wrong, it is a restoring to what is right. And we see throughout the New Testament pictures like we are reconciled to God. That's a restoration of something. That reconciliation, that language is a language of restoration. We are given all these different blessings through Christ that were not ours on the other side of justice, right? But justice had both and. There's a punishment that got paid and a reward that is given by grace. That's what justice is for us.
Yeah, and that word reconciliation is a big word with lots of meaning, and you used it as well, Daryl. And you kind of talked about it. Reconciliation towards other people too. Yeah. I'm kind of going rogue here because it just felt right. But talk about reconciliation, not just in the gospel sense, but also in the horizontal relationships, unless I misunderstood and I'm not making any sense.
No, that makes perfect sense.
He's looking at me like
You're good. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the whole point of justice, is to ultimately to lead to reconciliation.
Right.
That I would say that justice that falls short of reconciliation, or at least the pursuit of it and the option of reconciliation, is actually justice that falls short of God's vision of it. And so this is what we received, what Kirk was just talking about, that we were reconciled to Christ, as it's explained in Romans chapter 5, where it explains, like, while we were still his enemies, Christ was reconciling us to himself. And so what that means is he didn't leave us there. He didn't just forgive us, but he actually restored the relationship. And I think that's such a key thing for us to understand when we talk about this, that we don't just leave the person who has wronged you and just say, like, that's it. Like, you just leave it there and just say, I forgive you, and allow the harm and the trauma to happen again. That would be an incomplete version of justice. And it's not just saying I forgive. It's actually taking that one extra step of actually restoring the relationship. And so what that means is that something's going to change. What Christ did in us is Christ has changed us and transformed us through the power of the cross. And so when we have that, we know that we are able to actually restore relationships around us, which is going to be challenging. It's going to be messy, and it's going to be hard. And yet this is something that is worthwhile for us to pursue.
Which is why justice is both a spiritual and a physical issue. Because, the Bible is very clear. We are ambassadors of reconciliation. That is part of our role as Christians. So justice requires that we seek to reconcile people with God through the message and the sharing of the gospel of Jesus with people. But it also requires us to be reconciled to each other. I mean, there's no coincidence that Jesus says, he gives a new command to his disciples, love one another. People who couldn't stand each other because of cultural differences are suddenly told, now you got to love each other.
Yeah.
And that is a picture of justice. It's a picture of restoring what is broken. It's I spent some time in Israel, and I've met with some Jews and Palestinians who are believers. And there's a verse in the New Testament that talks about God making one new man. And they use this verse, how the gospel breaks down the dividing wall of hostility. They use this verse to talk about how, from their perspective, the only reason they are able to be in the same room and actually love each other is because of Jesus. He's the one who's broken down the wall of hostility between them as Jews and Palestinians. And so the gospel is both a physical, relational restoring of people and relationship, and a restoring and reconciling of our relationship with God.
I'll even jump in on this here of, I think we were just talking a little bit about this morning, of this idea that our church, Forward Church, is so diverse. When you give an illustration like that works in Israel and it works in Forward too.
Yeah.
Like, we have so many different cultures, and it blows me away every Sunday when I see people talking, hanging out, and I'm like, based upon your background, you shouldn't be friends. Like, typically in the world, you wouldn't interact at this level. And that is actually something that we as a church get to experience. We should celebrate it and embrace it, and also see that is an aspect of how the church is pursuing justice, is by breaking down those barriers. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It's something that I absolutely love about our church.
Yeah, that's awesome. In those little scenarios, you can see it, and the Holy Spirit at work too. So if we haven't, pursued reconciliation, even justice through reconciliation, that could make somebody bitter. Or, the unjust things in your life. So stewing on unjust things leads to bitterness. What effects does bitterness have on our spiritual lives?
So let's remember the context of Philippians 4. And Daryl, I know you've talked about this in Kitchener before. I brought it up for the first time in Cambridge. And it's just this idea, it's bookended with this idea of peace. Verse 7 talks about God's peace. Verse 9 talks about God's peace. So everything that we are called to think about in verse 8 is designed to bring us to a place of peace in our own hearts and lives and relationship with God. And if you're living in a place of bitterness, it is impossible for you to actually be walking in peace.
Yeah.
Those two worlds cannot coexist. You cannot have bitterness in your heart towards another person and at the same time say, yeah, I'm feeling chill. I'm feeling at peace. It's all good.
Right.
Right? No, you don't. Like, every time you think about that person or that injustice, your blood starts to boil, your emotions start to swirl, and it just, it gets out of hand. And when you become bitter, the Bible teaches us that bitterness is one of those places where you are giving a foothold to the devil in your life.
That's huge.
Right? So you are giving room for the devil to have an element or complete control over your own heart and mind when you allow bitterness to take root in your life. And I have far too often witnessed people who have destroyed their own life because of bitterness. More times than not, bitterness does not hurt anyone as much as it hurts yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And frankly, I've known people who have gotten physically sick because of bitterness in their own life. So there's a whole series of possible consequences that come out of bitterness in our lives.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, it's good for us to think about where bitterness comes from. I mean, And I can't help but think about this through, just give another example of where bitterness comes from. Something I deeply enjoy is drinking good coffee. And so I even watch YouTube videos about coffee.
You're talking about bitter coffee?
Why am I not surprised
to
by
learn
that?
more about coffee and how
I'm just not surprised.
That's how we need to get him to watch The Sound of Music. It's just make him a cup of coffee, put him in front of it,
and put it on YouTube.
Yes, Kirk, while I'm drinking my coffee in the morning, I might be watching a video about coffee. It's beautiful.
I mean, everybody has a happy place.
So I was watching a video yesterday. He was talking about brewing coffee, and he was brewing like this really old vintage coffee, which coffee gets worse over time, by the way. It does not get better.
Wait a minute. Coffee already starts off as horrible. You're telling me it goes worse?
I'm on the same page as you.
It gets worse.
All right, whatever.
You actually want fresh coffee, not old aged coffee. That's not a good thing.
All right.
But if you steep it for too long, like it gets bitter, right? Like it just, if you let the water soak in the coffee grounds for too long, it gets more and more bitter. It has this acidic taste to it, and it's just this awful experience. And I think this is the same thing when it talks about, think about these things, think about justice, that when we are stewing in the injustices, that is going to have a profound spiritual and physical effect upon our bodies and upon our souls. And so often this is what happens, like when we're slighted, when we're hurt by someone. And this is why in Romans 12, he's saying, give this back to God. He's the one who will ultimately set things right. And it gives you the freedom to do good to the people around you. And the more that we stew upon this, it's so vitally important. And I think that we're all guilty to some extent of falling into bitterness.
So I want to pick up on that, because as I was preaching on Sunday, one of the things that I kept swirling in my own mind was, if I was sitting out there and I had a real significant injustice committed against me, you know, I'd been abused, or someone was ripping me off, a customer was if I had my own business and a customer was ripping me off, or whatever, some type of significant injustice against me. And I listened to a preacher stand up and say, just give it to God, trust God. He's the one who's going to take care of the justice in this situation. In my own mind, I would be really struggling with that, because I would be sitting there going, so I should just keep my mouth shut and do nothing. Right? And I want to just be really clear with everyone. Giving it to God does not necessarily mean just keeping your mouth shut and doing nothing.
And letting go of
it. And just letting go of it. It does not mean that if you're in an abusive relationship, that you just sit there and say, well, I'm just going to give it to God and let them keep hitting me.
Right.
Right? That's not what it means to give to God. What it means to give to God is in some cases, it is a spiritual releasing and saying, God, I surrender this to you. And in other cases, it is a giving to what God has established to mete out justice. So God creates government and the rule of law to mete out justice for people, right? So you need to, part of giving it to God is, if a law has been broken towards you, if someone has abused you or robbed you and has broken a law, part of giving it to God is going and approaching the right authorities and saying, this has happened and I'd like to press charges. Now you are entrusting it to what God has created to mete out justice in our culture. And you are releasing that to God's care to lead those people through the process. Please don't be silent if you're in those situations. Especially if there's a law that's been broken against you. Speak out, deal with it in a way that will honor God. The passage in Romans 12 is talking about you taking matters into your own hands and trying to execute justice against the other person, not about you giving it to somebody else to find justice for you.
Yeah. And with that, the beautiful thing of the church, when we think of a passage like Isaiah chapter 1 of seeking justice for those who have faced injustice, this is what the church is meant to do, is that person who is finding themselves in that situation where they need help. It's not just the governing authorities, but it's also the church, or where the church does not just shrug and say, that's too bad. That's too bad. or worse yet. And I've heard so many heartbreaking stories of in a relationship with someone who's seeking out help, a wife who goes and tries to find help, and the church wasn't able and willing to step into that situation to give them the care that they needed. That's terrible. That's what the church is what the church is supposed to do is respond by pointing to the authorities and finding real tangible ways to help people who are facing injustices. That's what it means for us to truly seek after it.
Yep.
I'm like, just even hearing you guys talk, I can't help but see that there's a connection. We already connected justice with truth, but there's a connection to the honor as well that we talked about last week, right? You said that justice gives us freedom to show love and care to others, and that's also an honor.
It is
there, right?
Yeah, honor is the reason why you pursue justice.
Yeah.
When God tells us to honor everyone, let's be honest, it is hard to honor certain people. And the reason why you are able to honor them, or the way that you honor them, is by pursuing justice for their situation. I had the opportunity on Sunday to meet a woman and her son who are from Ukraine, who moved to Canada, immigrated to Canada in part because of the giving of Forward Church to our Ukrainian Relief Fund.
Wow.
She was in the service. She's been in the service the last few Sundays, and she was there this past Sunday. And she came up to meet me after the service, and she was just so grateful that people in Ontario, Canada, would care enough about her and her son to help them get out of the crimes that they were facing against them by a war that's happening in their homeland. And it was so incredibly moving as she tried to, in her broken English, tried to express her deep, deep love and gratitude to us as a church for the part we've played in their life.
Wow.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's such a cool story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that too. That this could perfectly lead into Daryl's buzzword that he brought up on Sunday, slacktivism. Kirk's like, I am not on the same page here. Great word. That kind of connects. Like, what does actual activism here like, and pursuing justice for other people versus slacktivism? Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so slacktivism, it's a bit of a buzzword. It's this idea of thinking that you are pursuing activism, pursuing justice without truly actually doing it. It's kind of the slacker's way of promoting and helping a true cause.
Yeah.
And so a great example of slacktivism would be if you go onto a website and it has a bright red button that says, click here to donate to bring relief to people in Ukraine. So that's what the button says. Then underneath it says, like and share it on your Facebook page. And rather than clicking the bright, big red button saying, give, do something, you see that other button saying, yeah, I'll share that on my page. I will let other people know about this cause. Maybe there's some people on Facebook who don't know about the war in Ukraine yet. Maybe that's a possibility. Which at this point, several months into it, probably not very likely. That would be slacktivism. It's this idea of I'm going to get involved and I'm going to give the minimum amount of effort and energy to do good. And the powerful thing and the dangerous thing about slacktivism is that it makes people think that they're actually making a deep difference, just as much as though they had given to that cause or they had gotten directly involved with it. And I think that that's a really dangerous thing. And I think even just to go a little bit further to maybe potentially step on some toes, I think that sometimes slacktivism finds its way into church culture as well. Like for so often in the church, we've talked about evangelism in the way of just invite your friends to church. Just invite them out. Bring them here and the professionals on the stage will do it. They'll bring the message home. I think in a way that could be considered slacktivism.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, how hard is it to go up to your friend and say, hey, there's this awesome event, really great music, really great message, building's air conditioned, there's even childcare, you get away from your kids for an hour or two, come on out. Like, is that truly, I want us to think for a second, is that truly evangelism? Is that truly sharing the gospel with someone?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a pretty low bar just to say, hey, invite someone out to it. I think that as disciples of Christ, we need to actually consider that of, is there something more that God is calling us to do? And that's why on Sunday, when I shared just before the message about these cards, these invites to the block party, it is not just to put them in a mailbox and just say, I've done my duty, I put it in my neighbor's mailbox. It's actually to go to someone and say, join me, come with me to this. We'll have a meal together and we'll hang out and start building that connection. That's where you take that extra step beyond just an invite and actually pursuing a relationship. Because, I mean, let's be honest, if that person became a Christian, you're probably going to have to hang out with them a little bit more. They're probably going to have some questions, right? And who better than like their buddy from soccer practice or from work who can now sit down with them and say, hey, what's on our work break? Let's read the Gospel of John together. And I'll answer as best I can questions about Christianity. How much more helpful would that be if we were pursuing this with that relational mindset?
And for those listeners with more questions regarding that, we have a series coming up soon in Acts, right?
Yep.
We're going to talk more about that kind of stuff, right?
This
Awesome.
fall. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was my connection to slacktivism there. Now, to Kirk's story of meeting that lovely Ukraine mom, there's your story. Like, just go back to that. No more slacktivism, guys.
That's right.
No more.
Yeah.
All right, we got a question this week. Oh, we said we were going to have confetti and balloons next time we got a question.
Oh, did we say that?
That was poor planning.
Right. We'll put it in post editing. Yeah. Billy can add that.
Add some confetti for us, Billy. We got a question.
Billy is not nodding his head.
He's going to whip it at us next time. He'll be like, anyways.
It's okay, Billy. Rob's the one who has to clean it up.
Yeah.
So it's fine.
Oh, man. No, this is exciting. I can't end the podcast without asking a question because we got a question from our viewers. So here we go. We're diving in. Here's the question. It was a big, long one, so we condensed it as best we could. Are the world's ideologies an attempt to restore a sense of justice to alleviate the anxiety from living in a cursed and broken world? Why will they not work? Who wants to dive in?
So the short answer to the question is yes.
Yes.
But it's more nuanced and complex than just a simple yes. I think Daryl alluded to it earlier when he said, all of us as humans, we are made in the image of God. And so anytime you see any human trying to pursue justice for another human being, proper, true justice for another human being, you are getting a glimpse of the image of God in that person. So it is not all bad. It is a reflection of the reality of God's image in us. Now, we are all sinners, and so we all pursue that justice in ways that don't exactly reflect what God is like and the fullness of who God is, but you still get a glimpse of the image of God in that person. The shortfall with the world's solutions is this. The world system believes if we can just make everyone have more money or treat each other with kindness and love, then we will all be fine.
Right.
But the Bible is pretty clear that none of those things happen without a heart change. Like Jesus said, all the things that we do that are sin come from what's in our hearts. And the only way that a heart change happens is through the gospel of Jesus. That is the only way that we can truly find peace with God and peace with each other. Every other attempt, while noble to some extent, will always fall a little bit short without full heart change of people who are surrendered to Jesus as the Lord of their life and being conformed and shaped into the image of Jesus. That's the only way possible for true justice to happen in the world.
I love that. Do you want to jump in, Daryl, or can I move on to the? I don't want to.
Yeah.
How about I do this? I'll give you guys the table to leave your listeners with whatever you want to leave them with. Keeping in mind, maybe there's a listener who's heard the message, heard the podcast, and now there's someone in their mind that they know that they need to forgive. The table is yours.
Yeah. I'll just riff off a little bit of what Kirk just said there in answering that question. I think that, I'll put it this way. I think about 10 or 15 years ago, I especially started hearing about this movement, this idea of the social gospel, this idea of churches really pursuing after social justice issues in the world. And the major concern at that time was that that Christians were merely pursuing justice and forgetting about the message of the gospel. And hearing about that and wrestling through that, I think that this is something that it's important to understand the connection there. That when we pursue justice, when we care for the oppressed in our culture, in the world around us, those who have been wronged, those who have faced abuse, and the church, as we step in to provide care, comfort, and resources for those individuals, that is a way that we are expressing the gospel. And it's where we don't stop there. We continue that discipleship process of truly explaining the reasons behind it.
Yep.
It's because we love people because of Christ. And it's this idea of we're not just trying to solve your problems. We also want you to have a restored relationship with Christ. And so the whole debate around this, I think it actually hurt a lot of people when they saw churches debating, should we pursue justice? And the answer has to be yes.
That's right.
We do have to do this. And it was great that on Sunday I could share some of the ways as Forward Church we've been trying to do this, from things like our racism class that we'll have available online in the fall, and then things like community organizations that we're partnering with, or donations to help bring relief to Ukraine. Like we're trying to, and it doesn't end there. It's all with this pursuit that we would reconcile people back to Christ. And so that is my hope for anyone who has faced real challenges in their life, that they wouldn't just merely pursue that issue would be corrected, but they would be pursuing after the one who can provide the ultimate comfort for our lives and for our souls. This is more than a physical issue. This is a deeply, profoundly a spiritual issue. And my hope for anyone who has faced this is that you would be able to draw closer to Christ, and that the church, we would be there to help you.
Yeah. And I would just echo what Daryl has said in this sense. As God's children, God's whole purpose is to conform us to the image of Jesus, to shape us to be more and more like Jesus. Romans 8 teaches that that's what God's doing. In our lives, he is shaping us to become more and more like Jesus. And you cannot separate justice and Jesus. So if you are someone who is thinking that justice is not a Christian issue, it's a world issue, I would just say really study the Gospels and how Jesus went about his life. The people that he interacted with and loved that the elite wanted nothing to do with. Study why Jesus got angry in the temple. Like really study, understand that that was a justice issue in the temple. And it wasn't simply about people selling things in the temple. There was more to it than people selling things in the temple. So if we are going to be conformed into the image of Jesus, we must be a people who pursue justice. And most importantly, we are pursuing the reconciliation between God and people. That is the purest, most ultimate form of justice that we can pursue in this world.
I love that. We're going to close it off the way we've closed off the other ones. I'm going to read Philippians 4:8.
You don't have it memorized yet, Blair?
I do, but I have like the NIV version, and there's different words like honorable is noble in that verse.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go to my phone.
How about this as a challenge?
Okay.
The very last podcast.
I love
for
it.
this. How about we get Blair
Yeah.
to
Bring it on.
recite it from memory?
You're gonna need to get an extra stick of confetti, Billy, for that one because it's gonna happen. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. We'll see you guys next week. I think we're talking about pure. Whatever is pure. See you guys next week. Have a good week.